Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is the programme where you can have your property related questions answered by a team of property experts. And joining me today is Sara Newson, MD and founder of Realm 47 Property Investment Group. Welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me today.
Good, well this is your second show now, so treat you with experience now.
Yes, expert now.
Good. Okay, and joining Sara is John Reynolds, CEO of Titan Developments, who's been on our shows numerous times and offered his expertise to our viewers. Thanks you for coming, John.
It's good to be back.
Good. Okay, well, we'll get straight on with the questioning. And Sara, you're going first. There seems a trend of buy-to-let portfolio owners to switch to serviced accommodation, presumably to take them out of the new legislation surrounding leasehold and rental reforms and its conditions. Is this really a good idea? And do the panel think that either local authorities or government will clamp down on this practice? After all, it isn't a better regulated market a good thing across the board? Personally, I think it would be. And I see today from the news in the newspapers today that there is going to be some discussion in the House of Lords about a regulatory body for the rental market. Where that goes, I'm really not sure. But what do you think?
Don't get me started on the renters reform, I would say.
You can do, I'll join you.
Regarding serviced accommodation, though, definitely, you know, there's been a massive move into that market in recent years. And it's not just one reason, there's multiple reasons for it. You know, HMO investors moved into the SA market looking for substantial cash flow returns rather than standard buy-to-let. They looked for a new strategy when there were, you know, plenty of HMOs in the market seemingly at the time. Article 4 came in restricting the conversion rights and people looked for something else, and serviced accommodation was an obvious go-to. And then you've got the buy-to-let investors who would have a standard family home, and then they've taken the view that they can get higher cash flow from serviced accommodation. So they've moved into that market as well. So multiple reasons why people have moved into it. And I 100% agree that there needs to be restrictions on the conversion to serviced accommodation. We need to look at that before there ends up being far too much of it. But it's very area specific.
I know certainly in London, I think from memory it's the Greater London Powers Act of 1979 or whenever, but you do need planning permission for serviced accommodation. Is that right across the country? Or?
There isn't that requirement in the rest of the country, no. So that is something that I think is needed, planning permission, and I don't think it'll be retrospective. I think it'll be restricting the right to convert from serviced accommodation from residential accommodation into serviced accommodation. At the moment, a standard serviced accommodation unit is still planning use class C3, which is residential. So they need to recategorise it so that they can put that in place. So there's quite a lot to be done in order to put it in place. But I do think it's needed, but not a blanket situation across the country, because, you know, there's places like York perhaps where we do perhaps need some more balance again, swinging back towards the residential houses, residential flats, the buy-to-let market. Places like Hull, it's really not a problem because they don't have a huge tourist market like they do in York. So I think it needs to be looked at from place to place. And then moving on to regulation, yes, I think we need to regulate. You know, in terms of the properties themselves, there isn't really much regulation. So the rental market, generally speaking, there's fire regulations. You need to have these tests done each year, rightly so. Whereas the serviced accommodation market currently doesn't really have much in that respect. And I think it is required, definitely. So there's two sides to that.
Without mentioning the name, there's one company that does a lot of this overnight renting, especially geared towards tourist market, which is, you know, hotly frowned on down here. I mean, I think we're still suffering huge fines for doing it in Tower Hamlets here, which is a hangover from the Olympics. They brought the regulations in to stop it happening here. A lot of people just letting their properties out for one night at a time and perhaps causing disturbance to other occupants of the building, that sort of thing. I'm guessing in York, obviously, you have got a huge tourist market there, and it's sort of quite attractive for an owner to do. Is that year round, or is it just summer months? Or?
It is year round in York, fortunately, yes. So in the winter months, we tend to get a lot of Asian visitors. We get a lot of retired people coming to York for a winter visit. We've got wonderful Christmas markets. So, you know, right throughout winter, it is very, very busy. And I think, you know, if we're going to restrict holiday lets, we're going to have to be really careful, because our economy in York thrives entirely on that tourism market and hospitality. We are the hospitality sector there. So if we start not giving them enough places to stay, the tourists aren't going to come, and that's going to cause us a problem. So they need to move very, very delicately, I think.
Here you are, John. There's another reason for government to stay out of things. Leave it to the local people who know their own market.
100%.
Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. And that stimulates the economy as well. So it's a direct effect on what their decision making to money.
I mean, it is a problem here where you get holiday lets down here. Because what the companies do, they tend to focus on a new development because it's all smart, clean, sharp, easy to let. But people go in, they bash their suitcases all around the walls. They don't care about the apartments because they're only there for a day.
I've been the developer that's actually gone that route, particularly one in Southampton, 44 flats there. Yeah. And where I went wrong, and you live and learn, was I mixed them up. So I would have the company you're talking about, sort of maybe 5 on one floor out of 10 units. Yeah. And the people that were on ASTs or owned those other flats were then chronically disturbed by people coming and going, cases, basically people talking in the communal areas, because they might only need to be there for a night or 2 nights for the boat show or whatever it is, and then actually they're disturbing the people. So,
and then of course when it gets tatty, they just leave the residents there with the service charge bill of smartening it all up again, and it's not clever. Okay, thank you for that, John. The world seems to be almost in a destructive mode, with war-torn countries across the globe soon to require massive programs of rebuilding and redevelopment. Do the panel think this will inevitably cause a world shortage of building materials, therefore creating an upward-only level of housing costs right across the UK?
Definitely.
I think
it's
so
pretty. It's a good question. It's pretty depressing, but it's real. I mean, Ukraine. I don't know what the number would be just there alone. I'm sure I read somewhere that over 400 billion is going to be needed from an infrastructure. So of course, a big part of that, I think 150 billion of that was the construction element. That's a huge number. And when that ultimately comes into play, that's going to send so many materials one way. It's undoubtedly going to affect the prices, the supply chains for the UK, let alone the rest of the world. No question. I think we all lived through those supply chain issues, just non-related to the question, but just on the basis of a couple of years ago when it was a challenge with the Suez Canal issue and so on. And the prices, I was getting a steel quote in the morning for a project that I was sort of looking to ultimately maybe order on the Friday, and let's just say it's the Tuesday. And I get an email in the afternoon with a different number going up, and then the following morning and so on. Now I know that's extreme, but at that point, you've got a number in your appraisal as a developer, or you're doing any kind of work as to your home. And how do you budget from that? Let alone if someone turns around and says the tap's off, we haven't got any more product.
And I mean, suppliers are going to be opportunistic, aren't they? And they're going to be selling to the highest.
I remember a couple of years ago, plaster. It was almost like kind of a seedy world of, how many bags do you want? It was like, joking, I've got some, because people have bought mass supply and then were doubling, tripling their prices, and you were just thinking, if that's a snapshot of what might be to come, it wasn't a good place.
No.
And you had people that were desperate to keep their jobs on target, on time, and they were paying the money. So that's a bad precedent.
Yes, I suppose all this rebuilding in one way could be beneficial for our construction industry. I mean, some of the big firms, I think we all know who they are, will be getting contracts around the world and bringing either dollars or pounds or whatever it is into this country. I mean, that's good in one way. But if the normal house builders are going to struggle for materials, we really are going to have a problem, aren't we?
And that's the bread and butter of the country. That's, the big boys account for a certain amount of, but they'll future-proof where they can, and they'll have the buying, It's a big industry in itself.
I thought we'd done away with those.
Well, that's why I hesitated when I said it. There's plenty of people that are involved in residential development, and they could have a huge negative impact on them just achieving what they've set out to do.
Anything to add to that, Sarah?
It's like the plaster, the toilet paper shortage, isn't it? We seem to have these different things. But yeah, from a smaller developer perspective, you know, I'm developing properties to go on to keep them as investments. And so, yes, that cost is hitting me, but I'm able to swallow that cost because I'm looking long-term at these properties. That's where I've been to date. I mean, if it gets a lot worse, I might look at it differently.
Yeah.
But you've said there because you're keeping them.
Exactly.
So
it's a different situation for me.
That cost at any one point is not that critical, is it?
Exactly.
But if you're having to sell.
Yeah.
But if it affects the cash flow element of the job to the point where, you know, going back to the question where there's a huge vacuum of materials going one way, and from the plaster to the timber to the steel, actually, you know, it might be that your contingency doesn't allow you to finish the project, and then you've got a stalled project, then you've got problems. That's extreme, but that's kind of where it could go, right? You know,
absolutely.
Like, I can't afford, but what I put in my numbers is totally different to...
Well, John, it's interesting when we have financiers on, I often ask them, I say, well, how sympathetic are you to a developer who's put in his costings, he's negotiated the loan with you, however, costs are spiralling almost day by day. How sympathetic are you to that? And I can't get a straight answer because the answer is not really.
No, I'm in that right now, and I'd say it really varies with the lender that you're working with, and I think choose your lender wisely and have a relationship, because I think some of them, you know, I've had a tough relationship with a couple where, sorry, you know, it's what we agreed and so on, and you're there talking about the world or whatever it might be. Others, they get it, they're working with you, they adjust the loan to value, they make sure the values are still realistic on the GDV, and you have a sensible conversation.
Okay. All right. Thank you both very much indeed. That's all we've got time for this half of the show. Join me again after break when we'll be asking Sarah and John more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time with Sara Newson and John Reynolds. Welcome back. Sarah, this is going to draw on your rental experience here. Do the panel think it's time for a rethink on the type of leases offered in the rental market? For example, could there be a clearly defined long lease of perhaps 12 months plus, say up to 5 years, and perhaps a 0 to 12 months short-term lease? If this approach was adopted, it could leave landlords and tenants with no doubt about their rights of tenure. And just to expand on that slightly, we know about no-fault evictions. We know that if you rent a property, that 12 months goes like a flash, doesn't it? And you think, oh, it'll never come, but it doesn't. It comes around very, very quickly. And the problem with persuading people to let their property for a long time is maybe these unsure economic times. Maybe that landlord can't afford to keep that property and keep you in it and keep it rented out. So I think there could be some great advantages here. That's just my view.
Circumstances change. I think that's key. And I think for renters, you know, they like flexibility. Generally speaking, most renters in my experience aren't staying in one place, in one property for a long period of time. They have plans to move or want the flexibility to be able to move easily to different cities with careers and with work. My fear is if we start messing with it, what are we going to get? You can currently set up a tenancy for 6 months or 3 years, longer if you wanted. So I think it very much varies on the person's situation in terms of the landlord and the tenant, you know?
I agree with you, but what I am saying there is it's no good somebody who is a landlord, it's perhaps a bit of an exaggeration to use this word, but perhaps a precarious landlord who's affected by finances very easily. It's no good him signing a 2, 3, 4 year rental because he might not be able to see it through. The government are trying to get institutions to do lets and are encouraging big companies. I mean, I could think even a big department store in London have taken on a huge swathe of rental properties, but they're just the sort of people that could offer long-term security, aren't they, with long-term leases, without being affected by the assured short-hold regulations, for instance.
Absolutely,
you see
yeah,
where
it's
I'm coming
something
from?
that can be offered, but like I said, it's whether the tenants would want that and whether they specifically need that. Yes, I agree that, 12 months does fly by. If you're a tenant, you move into a property, there's high cost of moving. Removal men aren't cheap these days. So you've got quite a high cost of moving. Dealing with utility companies, another no-no, of setting up utilities. So 12 months does fly by. Generally speaking, somebody's going to, unless they're in an HMO, they're going to want to stay longer than that. So they will want that security, generally speaking. Anybody who's between houses, they're going for serviced accommodation where the utilities are included. They don't need to deal with that faff. And they're, renting perhaps for a period of 1 month, 3 months, anything less than 6 months. So, I think what we have at the moment suffices. I think we've got good options for tenants and we've got good options
I was just going to be a bit difficult with you and say, do you want to try and answer the question, which is really, do you think we're in a time when we do need different sorts of leases? And your answer is no, really. Isn't it?
Got it in there before you asked.
What do you think, John?
I think we'd said it in the first half, don't overcomplicate it. Don't try and make it too difficult. I think people are needing flexibility more than ever right now. It's uncertain times on both sides. It could be a change of circumstances for the landlord or for the tenant.
Yeah.
I guess ultimately, right?
I mean, there's so many critical factors. I mean, I would, as a person, shy away from having an HMO or serviced accommodation thing because the management would just absolutely frighten me to death. And then, okay, I know it's easy to say, well, okay, get professionals to do it, but then your return on investment goes right down. So it's quite difficult. And an HMO or serviced accommodation does require several times the amount of management that a normal buy-to-let would.
But of course, it comes with the reward of a far greater yield of income. So,
all being well.
Generally speaking,
of course.
Not guaranteed.
No, not
by
at all.
any means.
No.
Serviced accommodation, I think there's a lot of people who have made that mistake moving into it, and then they're realising now that actually they're better off having them as a buy-to-let.
Interesting.
Then they're starting to move back, which we will see a lot of in the next few years.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Okay, John. I think that we are now on our 16th housing minister in a little over 10 years. What would the panel suggest be a realistic way of securing long-term successful housing strategies from the government? Clearly, the constantly changing ministerial leadership strategy isn't working.
Is it really 16 in 10 years? I mean, that's nuts. I mean, that just says how volatile and how difficult it's been to plan in any context as a developer and anyone in construction. And it does need to change. I think the solution has to be, particularly with May upcoming election and who knows where that then goes.
Do you know something we don't?
I just know that there's a pattern already. We're not looking at a situation that I can see is going to be instantly calm waters. So back to the question, a cross-party agreement that's literally got to be agreed where you can get continuity and consistency. Or something that's independent. Take it away from someone that, dare I say, is chosen for the role that isn't the right person for the role. I don't want to be too political about it, but 16 people, how many of those 16 people were actually the right person for that role?
Well, it's really one of those jobs, you either get it on the way up or the way down, don't you?
Exactly, but it's too important a role. It needs to be someone that we all agree is that's the perfect person for that role, and then remove it from politics, remove it from getting votes.
But it also needs somebody who understands the property market.
Well, that's what I mean by professional. So for you, Sarah, for me to actually go, brilliant, that's the perfect person with the right team, and then set the agenda, set the criteria that we can work towards, knowing that we're not kind of going, well, what's the point? Because she's about to be replaced with him, and do we even think he's going to be there by the end of the year? Which is basically what's been happening. I hadn't realised it was 16 in 10 years. I knew it was
so to answer
almost
the
one
question,
a year.
What's the answer?
I'd say independent. For my choice, it would be independent, and you would literally headhunt the perfect person. I'm not going to name anyone that could actually be that person with the right team, administering consistency and continuity.
Yeah. Sarah, what do you think?
I think that's a great answer. Yeah, I think it needs to be people with first-hand experience in the market, dealing with it now, dealing with housing market, you know, the market, perhaps being a landlord, perhaps doing, you know, a bit of development themselves, or certainly having advisors in the local areas who are immersed in it and who have that immediate experience.
It's not politicians.
Yeah. Do you think the other slight problem is where the government go to get their information from?
Yeah.
I mean, I'll probably get hung, drawn and quartered for this, but you know, the usual protocol is the RICS. And whilst they are a fantastic body of surveyors and a great organisation, they're not at the ground level of selling, buying, transferring properties to other family members or that sort of thing. They're just not at that ground level, are they? In the main.
No, I agree, and I've mentioned before, some of their decision making is often to protect lenders, for those right reasons. That's fine, but it's not the overarching viewpoint. You know, you need a 360-degree view of this, and it needs to be someone, and Sara said it well, someone that's in the trenches, been there, done that, and really knows, you know, from a vision, targets, goals, and can put everything into the mixing pot and come up with the right, you know, scenario, and then ultimately plan for it. Because that's the thing for me is there's no point adhering to anything that's come out of the last 16 people's mouths because they're not going to be there.
No. And what about housing targets, John? I mean, again, somebody's come out this week and said, oh, well, we need between 300,000 and 500,000 homes per year. Where are those figures coming from? I mean, for instance, Sarah, down here, immigration is quite a hot subject. Is it up in York?
Not so much. No, not so
much. I mean,
much.
Is it something you talk about daily? Because it is down here. And the trouble is with those kind of disjointed conversations is you get wrong figures.
Yeah, and again, it's politics getting involved, and it's you know, perhaps different agendas. When ultimately, I mean, we could do more. You know, we've had the lending situation with interest rates that hasn't helped. We've got the materials we've talked about and so on. But ultimately, if you could just try and, you know, I think for me actually, it's all about the planning system. You know, if you want me to be honest, that the whole thing with planning in both our worlds, it just slows everything down. It's archaic. It's broken. You really focus on that and make that. I don't want to say easier, but it needs to be different. You could use tech more. You could use the algorithms to ultimately know where we should be doing more against the supply and demand, and then just focus on those areas and incentivize developers and developments to take place.
Yeah. I mean, I just nobody seems to be sort of operating what you call joined up thinking, do they?
Yeah, exactly.
You know.
Exactly. It's decision making of him, which, and you say you brought up Ricks and so on, and are they the right people?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, there we are. That's all we've got time for today. So, Sara Newson, thank you very much for coming down to see us again.
Thank you for having me.
And John Reynolds, thank you very much for coming in. Great stuff. Great information that you've imparted. Thank you. Thank you for watching. I'm Stephen Galpin. See you next time on Property Question Time.